Let's get started today with the message on a good wife is a good gift from God. A good wife is a gift from God. Now, if 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 that is true, if that is true, then we know that someone somewhere has made the same mistakes I have. Now, we know we're on the series Confessions of a Prophet, and because we're in that confession mode, I have made a lot of them, but I finally have come to the point in time and place in this ordeal where you'll begin to see that there is a way to know when you have the right mate, when it's of God. Not every marriage is put together by God. A lot of times, their marriages are put together for other purposes, for other reasons, other things. The situation is that when we're young, we have our hormones are just raging within us, and we usually are looking for a mate for the wrong reasons. God gave every man and woman a measure of lust that they may marry, but it should not be the spirit of lust that puts us together. It should be the Spirit of God. And this is one thing that I had learned after many, many wrong turns in my life, and I'm trying to help people avoid that type of life and get around that stuff because it's very hurtful. I mean, really, honestly, going through a divorce is probably the most painful thing a person can go through. Rejection is horrendous. I don't care what the circumstances are, who is at fault. You're going to pay the price. It's going to cost you. It's going to be a bad situation. So let me just start out this way. I didn't know exactly why I kept finding the wrong person. I thought I had the right formula for finding the right person, but every time it failed. So I had made a decision when I had been called of God to be his prophet and minister. I had made the decision within my own mind I was not going to remarry. I was going to stay single. And that was not God's thinking. He eventually began to start nudging me that direction. I thought, Lord, I don't even know anybody. I don't even know who I'd marry. I don't know who I would be interested in. Well, I'm going to walk you through my confession of the process I went through that gave me understanding on a lot of different things. And I hope you gain the knowledge from this as I begin to share it with you. Now, let me go back a little bit to 1987. 1987, I was married at that time to a troubled woman. If you don't know who that was, you can go back and find that particular teaching on troubled woman. And she was very prophetic. I knew that we were put together by God. I knew that God had a plan, but there was a problem. And she was a lot more prophetic than I was at that particular point in time. Now, we had gone to a church. I had moved to Texas, and she was supposed to move down after she got some of the properties that we had rented out up there sold, and then she was going to move from Ponca City, Oklahoma, back to Fort Worth, Texas. So as I'm there, I'm getting associated with a lot of different ministries and churches and things. And I found this one church I was very interested in. It wasn't a very big church. It was pretty small. And I really enjoyed the services there and the teachings. And I was learning a lot about the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And so she came down to visit one Sunday, and we went to that church. Now, get a hold of this. We're sitting in the pew. Things are just getting started. The praise and worship team's getting up on the stage. And the troubled woman, I'll just use that by her name, she leans over and says, "You see that young lady up there in the polka dot black and white dress?" And I said, "Yes." She says, "She's going to be your wife." And I thought, what? What are you talking about? Are you crazy? We're married. I thought, what is going on with her? Why is she saying something like that? I don't even know who that person is. And then I started thinking, well, maybe she's accusing me of seeing this girl. I said, I don't even know who that person is. I don't know her name. I've never met her. That's the first time I've ever seen her. She's never even been here before. And so I just left it at that, and so did the troubled woman. She didn't bring it up anymore. And as time went on, she knew God was calling us both into the ministry, into the prophetic ministry. like I said, she had had a lot of prophetic encounters along the way, and many of those things were just really right on. She came through a horrible life. It was very, very troubling from the time she was a small child all the way through the rest of her life. But because of that, I think God was using her in a way that was very supernatural and spectacular. But the fact was, she did not want to follow God. I told her, I said, look, you know God's calling you. And she says, I know it. I said, well, what's the problem? She says, well, I married a banker, not a preacher. And I said, yeah, but God's calling you. She says, but I'm not going. And I thought, you're not going? You're not going to follow God? I don't understand. But she didn't want to. She didn't want that lifestyle. She didn't want to be in that particular segment of life as somebody who was there to be a vessel for God to speak through, to minister to people, whatever God wanted to do. Because all she could see was being a pastor's wife, and she saw that not to be a very good thing. Because pastors' wives do go through a lot in most cases. So, time went on. I mean, it went through a period of time there, and say, gosh, by the time, now I wound up going to prison in 1988 on things that, God put before me that I didn't even have to say anything about, but he brought it to my attention and said, you need to confess to this. And he said, if you will tell the truth, you'll be free in your spirit, but you'll serve time in man's prison. But if you don't tell the truth, you'll be imprisoned in your spirit, but you won't have to go to man's prison. Well, to me, that didn't leave me a choice. I had to call up the FBI and go tell them what happened. They said, well, you don't even have to tell us this. Nobody's even looking for you. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I got to do it anyway. This is what God said to do. And so they thought I was nuts. They thought I was a nutcase. And, it went on. And the rest of that story. And that's even in one of the teachings. I don't know exactly which one it is right off because I'm already in number 16. But what happened was when I came back from the Happy Camper after 10 and a half months, then I started, getting back into the church scene. I started working toward trying, because really I learned how to hear God with such veracity that it was just unbelievable. I would just felt like I was just so much on a cloud. I couldn't really even come down to what was normal. And being in the confines of a concentrated place of a lot of convicts, where you'd think that would be the worst place to be, but it was the best, because I was in solitude, so I could spend my time with God. And I did relearn a lot of things. He trashed me of a lot of things I've been taught that weren't right, and he reprogrammed me, you might say, until I was ready to go. So when I came out, I was not fearful. I was not afraid. I didn't feel ashamed. I was ready to start ministering. So I went back to that same little church that the troubled woman had told me that the girl at the stage was going to be my wife one day. And I thought, I never did even think too much about it. This is 3 years later, 1990. From 1987 to 1990, I never stepped back in that church again. In 1990, I came back around to that church again. They had a prophet coming there to speak, and I wanted to come hear what he had to say. And so I was invited by one of the church members, and so I came out to see. And so when I came in, everybody was gathered around, and there was that girl in that polka-dotted black and white dress. Now, I can't remember. I don't think she's wearing the same dress, but she was there. And so we were all kind of milling around, getting our chairs ready, because we were sitting in a different setting rather than the regular church setup. We had a table where the prophet was going to begin to go around the table and minister to each one of us. So that was going to be kind of a special event. And so as we're standing around talking, I thought, well, I'll go over and introduce myself. And I said, I told her who I was. She said, yeah, I know who you are. And I thought, well, how do you know who I am? Evidently, her brothers knew who I was, and her brothers I was friends with before, and I didn't even know they had a sister. So anyway, I said, well, I told her my name, and I said, what's your name? She said, my name's Andrea. And I said, oh, I was just doing my prayer journal this morning, and your name popped up. She said, oh, really? She said, well, that's a new come on, a pickup line. And I said, no, really, I'm serious. I've got my journal out in the truck. I'll show you. So I went out to get my journal, and because I did a prayer journal every day. That was what I was doing at the time, learning how to hear the voice of God. And so I went to that page, and I read the part there, and what I'd said, I said, Lord, I know you're pushing me to get married again. I'm really not interested, but if I'm supposed to marry somebody, who's it going to be? and he gave me the word Andrea, the name Andrea. Well, I thought, I don't even know an Andrea. Never even known anybody named Andrea. So when I brought the manual or the notebook back into the church, and I wanted her to see her name was actually written there, I didn't want her to think I was lying to her. So I brought it in to prove it. But I had to hold my hand over that line of my question, but just let her see the answer that God gave me, which was her name. She said, well, that's quite interesting. She said, when did you write that in there? I said, well, I did it this morning before I got here. So, it was kind of a prodding going back and forth, and it was rather interesting to me, the challenge in it all. But at the same time, I felt like, this is going to be something that I'm going to have to walk through very carefully, because I don't want to get attached or interested in anybody. So as time went on, it seemed like every time we turned around, we were being drawn together or being put in a situation to be in the same room, maybe a lot of other people. We never actually had a date, but we were both single. She was 32 years old, and I thought, well, and she'd never been married, didn't have any children, and I thought, well, I'll call her up and see if she wants to get some coffee. So that was kind of all we did, was go get coffee. And what we'd do the whole time is talk about Scripture, talk about theology, and usually it turned into quite a debate. Sometimes you get a little heated, and you're thinking, what kind of arrangement is this, God? You have me. Sometimes we'd part ways and be a little bit hot under the collar because we were just a little bit put out with each other. So we wondered, what is going on here? But the Spirit of God would keep putting us back in the same place. Her mom would have her go over and ask me if what I was doing after Sunday church, where I was going to eat, and I'd tell them I didn't have plans. They'd invite me over to the house. Well, all the brothers and her and some of the brothers were married, and their wives, so I would eat with them, and that's how it kind of got started. Then there was other things that took place that kind of brought in some clues to some things. So our church had been invited to join in on another church who had a prophet coming in named Craig Brooks, and so we all took our whole church and went over to this other church, and he's calling these men up to prophesy over them. And so as he called them all up, he would ask their name so that on the master tape that was recording, they could find their prophecy, because their name would be on there. He would call their name out and it'd be recorded. So when he came to me, he said, what's your name? And I said, Kent. And he said, Andy? And I said, no, Kent. Now, you got to understand, Andrea's nickname was Andy, and all her family called her Andy. So as soon as he called me out as Andy, all of them started looking, we told you, y'all are going to get married, y'all are a couple, whatever, but we didn't consider ourselves a couple at all. In fact, she got kind of put out at everybody for even saying that. So it was really kind of like a God thing, because can't sound like Andy, nowhere close can it sound like Andy. So we just kind of knew, and it was also something God was using to pry my stubbornness into the direction he was wanting me to go. Well, so here's the deal. First, you're drawn by the Spirit, and you become one in the Spirit as God's already proclaimed it, even though you might not be in agreement with it. And then he begins to work on the soul. The soul is the mind, will, and emotion. Now, the soul has to be worked on because you're not in agreement on a lot of things. We weren't in agreement on a lot of things. So you work through that process and discussing a lot of things, what if, and, what do you think about this, and, how do you believe about this particular verse of Scripture? What do you think about this minister? But you work out all those kind of things until finally you sometimes agree to disagree, but at least you know where each one stands, and you become one in the soul. You understand what I'm saying? You become soulmates. Okay, now you got those two parts, the three parts that were created in to be joined together. All that's left is the body, because you're created in body, soul, and spirit. Well, God has to do that because, honestly, we weren't drawn to each other physically at all. But one New Year's Eve, after everybody had left my house, I had a home at the time, and I had everybody at the church over that wanted to come over for New Year's Eve, and Of course, that was just a good thing to do because every other place you go to wouldn't be a good place to be. And so as we were cleaning up, all of a sudden, God just dropped it in me, and I knew He had done it because I couldn't have been able to get to that place. And all of a sudden, I had a very strong desire for her and her physical appearance, to be nice about it. And so from that point, we started talking about what if? What if we got married? What if we were married? I said, one thing I won't do is I don't want a bunch of people moving in my house. I don't want family, I know it can come in hard times, but I don't want to be the net that catches everybody. I'm not into the situation of trying to bail everybody out of everything, So we were kind of on those kind of terms, and we were going through that process. And then, we never really said, will you marry me? We never got to that point. We just knew that we knew in our knower that we were supposed to be one. And so that happened. And in 1991, we were married. Now there were some other things that I left out that was just as strong a confirmation as the other two things I just told you. But there was a lot of things that you need to know. There's a lot of things you need to know. And before we would get married, her mother and father, who were ministers, had been all her life. He was a pastor. They said, look, we don't have a problem with you at all. We love you. We know who you are. But one thing we got a problem with is you've been married so many times before. I said, I understand that. They said, we want to do a counseling session with you. It'll take about 3 or 4 different times to get together, and then we'll have some answers and we'll know what the problem is. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting to me because I've been trying to figure out what's wrong with me all along, because I figured it couldn't be all 4 of those other women. It had to be somebody in there that was a problem, and it wasn't just all on them. Something had to be something wrong with me. So what it came down to, after all those particular sessions, it got down to the place to where this was called judgment counseling. And they said, you made a judgment when you were 9 years old, when your mom was killed in that car wreck. And whether you said it out loud or whether you just thought it or whether it was subliminal, it doesn't matter. The judgment was made that every woman you love will leave you, because that's what happened. When your mom was killed, she left you. So you made a judgment that every woman that you meet and become attached to, they would leave you. And because of the judgment, that force itself will cause that person to leave. They will do things out of their ordinary person, not their nature of doing things. They will do things that will destroy the marriage and cause them to leave. Now, I thought, that's the strangest thing I've ever heard, but if you think that's what it is, then what do I do? They said, well, we're going to ask you to pray and ask God to release you of this judgment. So I did, and I didn't feel anything, but, I was going along with their 30-something years worth of ministry and their experience. I wasn't the one that experienced there. They were. And so we got married, and, we had a child. But that in itself was even another very prophetic incident. In 1992, my wife and I were holding a service in Jacksboro, Texas, and it was with a couple who had a nice ranch out there, and they wanted to be able to have a big cookout with a barbecue pit and all that stuff, and everybody outside is a nice spring evening. And then it went into the night, and as I'd finished the message, then I said, let's all get out that field out there on the side of that hill. Let's all hold hands and let's pray under these magnificent stars. There were stars that were so close and so bright because we were way out in the country. There was no city lights to block out the brightness of the stars. And so we all started praying, and then God told me, He said, while we're praying, most of us praying in the Spirit, praying in tongues, and the Lord said, tell your wife she will be with child before the year's out. Now I thought, wait a minute, I got something to say about this. This was in October of 1992. And so I thought, well, Lord, I got something to say about it, but you tell me I got to tell her, I'll tell her. So with everybody listening, I said, Andrea, I said, God told me to tell you you'll be with child before the year's out. Well, everybody was excited about that, and she was too. And so I thought, well, we'll see what happens here. So we got really busy ministering. We were already ministering 6 days a week, and on radio and in Charisma magazine and doing a lot of other things. And so as we began to slow down, coming closer to the end of the year, coming New Year's, we realized, I said, you know what? I guess I missed that prophecy. I guess I missed God on that. Maybe I spoke presumptuously. I don't understand it. And she said, well, I don't either. Well, come February of 1993, she says, you know, I think I'm pregnant. I thought, really? You got to kid me. So we went and found us a midwife, and she, did all what she does. And she says, well, it looks to me like you got pregnant about the end of the year, somewhere around December 30th, 31st, somewhere around there. And she said, that makes it going to be September 19th when you're going to have the child. Well, I thought that would be unusual. I'll have a birthday baby because my birthday's on September 19th. And so we were, not really thinking about so much of that as we were just trying to go through this process of having a child. And I already had one child, Jenny, my oldest, and, she was a little bit put out by the whole thing, but she got over it after she got to hold the baby. She just fell in love with Savannah, and still is to this day. And as time went forward, and we did go through a lot. We were supposed to have the baby at home. That didn't work. Wound up going to the hospital. That turned into a nightmare because the baby was breech, and then they had to do a C-section, and that's not really what we wanted, but that's what we got. And then from there, I was just worn out too. We spent 36 hours, Of course, I wasn't in labor, but I was laboring of sorts, just not the same way. And I was just totally worn out. So when our family got there at the hospital, I said, look, I got to go get something to eat. So I'm going to go find me a Denny's because I guess it's still the same today. I don't know. But at Denny's, if it's your birthday, you get a free meal. So I thought I need to go find a Denny's. So there was one just right across the interstate. I went over there and got my free meal, and I was eating, and I got talking to the waitress, and I said, I just had a baby last night. And she said, really? I said, yeah. She was born on my birthday. Really? She said, well, I was born on my daddy's birthday too. I thought, what are the odds of that? I mean, how many people do you know that were born on their father or their mother's birthday? I mean, it's not too often. And to have somebody meet them the same day that had the same experience is even more out of the ordinary. So I knew I was on the right path, and surely it was, because 18 years of marriage. And unfortunately, Andrea got ill when she was 50 years old, and she passed away. And it was really a hard time for Savannah and I. Savannah was a teenager. We went through a lot, and it drew Savannah and I a lot closer because we were trying to take care of things, because it went on for about 3 years before she passed away. And it was hard. It was really hard. But the fact is, we knew where her name was written on the Lamb's Book of Life. We knew she was going to be Jesus Christ. So that was the best part of it we could look toward to. But then we had the situation to deal with of trying to figure out how to live now, because I was not really someone who knew how to work a washing machine. Savannah wasn't either. We didn't know much about taking care of home. And I think having a good wife has a lot to do with what happens in a household. I mean, really, they're kind of the captain of the ship, and they keep it all in order. They keep it moving forward. They're looking ahead all the time at the needs of everybody in the household and taking care of what those things need to be. If there's enough clothes in the hanging in the closet for them to wear, is there enough food in the cabinet? It's a lot to keep up with. And usually the man takes care of the outside. Well, that's been tradition, but things change. I mean, I've had brother-in-laws that they were the daddy mama, and they took care of the house and did all the cooking, did all that. Which if that's the way it is and it works for them, so be it. But for most part, most women today are going through a lot of different scenarios of trying to figure out how to make life in the married life when they have been so used to somebody else taking care of everything and nobody really taught them. And so, when I did eventually remarry, and you'll get to know more about my Debbie, later on, because she was really a lifeline, and I can tell you how God lined that up to let me know this is the right one. And that's all you need to know. And my point is, for this whole series, is you don't have to keep bouncing off walls and going through all kinds of trauma to find the right person. All you need to do is find God, and God will lead you to the right person. Now, I've been blessed with the ability at times to help people find that right person, or at least call that person to be the right one. Now, there might be some conditions in there that I have to prepare them for, that I've seen prophetically that they'll have to deal with. But as long as they can live with that, then so be it. But it's a lot easier to deal with something when you know what you're going to have to deal with. You can go through about anything as long as you know God's involved in it, surely. Because not just because you have a good wife that is appointed of God, and you join together in body, soul, and spirit by God, because just because you got a marriage license doesn't mean it's by God. And just because you got married in a church doesn't mean it's God. Even if you have the best preacher, priest, or whoever it might be that did the services, doesn't necessarily mean it's of God, because what means of God is what brought it together. And what brings it together, that God will bless when he's brought it together. Because like it says, a marriage is put together by God, no man can tear apart. Nobody can break it. Nobody can move it out of the way. That doesn't mean you're not going to have some hiccups along the way. You will. Because there's just going to be some indifferences that have to be worked out. But as long as you're trusting God and you're keeping yourself in check, not letting your emotions go overboard and run you into a situation that causes you to do something stupid, then you'll be okay. You'll make it. It will work out. Because the first and foremost thing is, is this of God, then this is the best it's going to get. And there ain't going to get any gooder. So you might as well just bear down and go with it, whatever it is. And that's the only way to get through a marriage, even of the best. Because there's no fairy tale marriages. There's no make-believe life of a dream that somebody dreamed that works out with no hitches, no bumps, no dips, no curves, nothing that's shocking, nothing that you don't have anything that's clean. Now, I have a lot of women that'll ask me, I want a man, and they tell me what they want. And I say, well, I tell you what, I do know who that man is. And they get all excited. What's he look like? Well, I can't tell you exactly what he looks like, but I can tell you his name. Oh, well, they really get excited. I said, what you're wanting is somebody who's perfect, the perfect man. Yeah. Well, that's Jesus Christ. And I'm sorry, he's already spoken for. And his wife is the church. So, you're not going to find that. So, and you guys the same way. You're not going to find that perfect woman. You're just not going to do it, because we're not perfect beings. We're imperfect, but we're getting better as we go. At least we should be trying to. And that is really all you can ask of anybody, is give me some forgiveness, give me some grace, and let me make my mistakes and forgive me quickly, and we'll get through this. And, I'm not talking about mistakes like committing adultery. That is not a mistake. That's premeditated, believe me. You have to flow with the go of something that's taking you to the bottom of the pit to go that way. And just because you think you did something that nobody else is going to know about, God knows. And when God knows, he can make it come out of the closets, out of the nights, like ghosts, and haunt you the rest of your days and torment your marriage. Really, you can't go by just so nobody sin, because the eyes and ears of God are everywhere. And when God's eyes and ears are everywhere, there's nothing you can do that God doesn't know about. So don't even entertain the thought of doing something unjust to your mate, doing something that would cause them pain or heartache. Don't do something so stupid that you think it'll be okay because I'm flirting with this person, but, I'm not going to do anything. You don't know that. Because if you're already flirting, you've already made a decision, and you've already had the Spirit already pushing you that direction. And it's not the Spirit of God. It's something from the very pits of hell. So let's wise up. Let's look to see what God has to do and the way God wants to do it. And we will find our way through it. Because really, this life, we're just passing through. And it's really a short distance compared to eternity. Because the best of this life could be 120 years, And really, you can't even call that life. Because living here in this world, and it's all of its sickness, diseases, its corruption, its evil, it's not the life that we're looking for. It's the life to come that we're now living for in this life. We're bearing it up just to get there. We're going through this because we're being marked up on everything that we do, everything we even say. There's a recording of that being made for our day of judgment. So don't think you're fooling God by thinking that you can get by with anything. God knows. And what God knows is all that really counts, because he's the only one that can really chastise you in a way that you've never been chastened before. And when you're chastened by the hand of God, believe me, it hurts. I've been there too many times, people. I know what I'm talking about. My confessions are for the purpose of helping you stay out of the same messes I've been in my life. That's the best I can do, is use myself and my examples of what I've done wrong, but what I've found to be right. And if I can lead you into the light and give you just a little bit of revelation of how your life can be much better, that's what I've intended to do, and I've done a job well done. And I hope that you will receive what I tell you this day. Now, on another note, let me just say this. I'm expecting some real breakthroughs this coming summer. Even parts of the rest of the spring, some of it's going to be good, but there's going to be some real breakthroughs come through summer. Look at it this way. Every time our nation has gone through a hard time, there's been a spirit of God come down upon this land that has blessed our socks off. And we're about to see something just mighty, something that's a move of God that is greater than anything you've seen before. And just look forward to it, because he did not allow us to go through this press, to be pressed down, shaken forth, and bubbling over, to let us just fall on our faces. He did not grind us to powder. All he did is stir us up. Now wait and see what God's going to do in the days to come. Next week, we'll be talking about another double portion of God's blessings. Until then, so be it. God bless you. Amen.